Have a great day, everyone. Welcome to the introduction to the study of literature. By the way, what is literature? Why is it important that we will study um, this portion of knowledge? Well, literature is defined as written works which deals with themes of permanent and universal interest characterized by creativeness and grace of expression. If you come to think of it, literature is not only local. It has an essence of being international. It can be used anywhere, anytime, any moment. That separates literature from a common piece of written art or a common piece of written material. Literature is also said to be an expression of emotions, thoughts, beliefs, aspirations, dreams, goals of humanity, and in general of man in popular. Anything that man can think in his mind and he will write it down, it is already a piece of literature. That's why literature is very, very general. Anything that you can write, you can produce out of anything that enters your mind. That is literature. Now, Philippine literature only gives scope and limitation to this subject. As when you say literature, it entails everything around the world under the sun. But when you say Philippine literature, these are literatures made and done by Filipinos anywhere in the world. So, we will be dealing with piece of art, expression, written capabilities, written materials produced by Filipino anywhere in the world. Now, our semestral objectives will be very, very simple. You will be able, at the end of this modular study, you will be able to express your personal feelings, your emotions, your gratitudes by means of creating and producing quality-based and original literary output. One of those examples is poetry. Believe me, at the end of this class, you will be able to write a poetry of your own. Very simple at that, but you can improve through the years. Well, complex poetry always starts from, or always started from, simple poetry. Another objective is develop the literature in oneself, as all people are created with a sense of expressiveness, meaning everyone can write. It just matter when they will start writing. A person producing literature is called a literatur. The spelling is Literatur, literatur. Okay? So again, a person producing literature is called a literatur. Literature actually is a three-syllable word. It's not literature. That is wrong. So you pronounce it as literature. Now, the last objective here is explain the literary concept not only of general literary creations, but also literary languages from diversified sources throughout the world. So we are not only going to make literature, we will understand the languages that is buried in literature. We will interpret them. We will study the languages that man speak. Okay? Because this is included in the appreciation and study of literature. So the next thing that we'll address here is, what are the views in tackling literature? Number one, literature should have an initiative. It is believed that in the study of literary background, that writers follow the example of other authors because they arrive at their own original work. So in literature, you can always copy. But what happens to your life is different from what is happening to others. You may copy the style, but the content is different because literature is the reflection of your life. So, literature, number one, is initiative. Number two, literature is representative. Any literary work is a substitute for an absolute reality, meaning, if you can produce a work of your own, it's already something created by the mind. Number three, literature is appreciative. This gives us a bigger view of life. Literature is useless if it is not appreciative as a topic. So when you write something and it cannot appreciate goodness, it cannot appreciate beauty, it cannot appreciate the good points of man. If you write to put man down, if you write to create evil, to produce selfishness, that is not literature in its proper objective, in its proper view. So the best view of producing literature is for it to be appreciative. We write because we appreciate something. We write because we see something good. We write because we have good things in mind. Because if that is our theoretical view of literature, every people who will read what we write will enjoy. Can you just imagine if you write things that are detrimental to humanity, things about killing, things about snubbing, things about putting down others? When other people read about your literature, they will also have stress reading your literature. That's why literature should be appreciative. And lastly, the last theoretical view of literature that we'll be tackling here is literature should be symbolic. Remember, what separates literature from a common day writing is the symbols we used. A good example here that I can tell you is when you say something, the room is very crowded. You use a simple language here, okay? Nothing symbolic. So it does not really make the people fronting you think of what you are trying to say. But you say something like, the room is just like a sardines. So you try to imagine what is the characteristics of a canned sardines. Well, it's one can with 5 to 6 fishes in there. That means it is crowded. So you just try to symbolically represent crowd with sardines. People think, and when they can decode that, they will be very happy. That is the essence of literature. When the symbolics become very, very obvious to others, and they will have the opportunity to uncover what you have actually encoded. They decode what you have encoded. Now the next subtopic here is, what are the standards of literature? Well, we will not really delve deeper in this because you can always just see this in your Google or in your literature book. Literatures must be artistic. Why? Because this is not a common day writing. This is a writing of symbolism. It should have intellectuality. So when you write and your piece of writing, and you want your piece of writing to delve to thrive through the ages, and you want it to be considered literature, write with intellect. Do not write useless things. Number 3, literature has suggestiveness. When you write something, you're trying to point out something, you're not saying it, but people will know that you are referring to that when they read your literature. A good example to that is when you want to talk about peace. You don't have to mention the word peace, but when you say something like, we want war to be over, we want people, enemies, to shake hands, we want bloodshed to stop, we want the darkness of communication to end. You may not have mentioned the word peace, but you are suggesting the word peace. That is the standard of literature called suggestiveness. Number 4, literature should have spiritual value. When I say spiritual value, it should have something that can touch the soul. If the literature is only to boast, it should only to tell others what you can do, but it does not have a lesson, it does not have something within that can touch, that can move people, it's a useless literature. So one of the standards of literature is it should have spiritual value, meaning it should have an impact on others. Number 5, literature should have permanence. Permanence means if it is useful now, it's still useful in the next generation, it's still useful in the future, it can thrive. Because the problem is, if you only write something that is good for now, then tomorrow after your literature is done, it will already be garbage. So when you write something with permanence. What are things that has permanence? Number 1 is value. Number 2 is love. Love will always thrive through the ages because since now until the future, there will always be love. Because without love, there will be no marriage. Without marriage, there will be no reproduction. Without reproduction, this world will become empty in the future. That's why write with permanence, meaning write something that is valuable now and will still be valuable in the next few years, in the next generation. That is permanence. Number 6, universality. So this is the standard of literature. That means if your literature is readable or useful in the Philippines, it should also be useful in America. So refrain from writing something that is only generic and useful to Filipinos. When you say something like, when you talk about sports, you talk about something that happened in sports that can happen anywhere. Do not talk about the specific place where the sports happen because people from other countries may not be interested with that. So the universality here means what the Filipino can use, the American can use, the Japanese can use, the other races can use. So write about something general that these people outside of your reach, outside of your culture, will also be what benefited by what you write. That is universality. Lastly, the standard of literature should always have style. That's why in poetry, you have rhythm. In poetry, you have rhyme. In music, you have tune. Okay? In, what do you call this? In drama, you have actually local color. This is what you call style. Because if your poetry is just mere writing, mere reading, well, there is no style there. So it cannot be considered something permanent, something universal. And what makes something permanent and universal is the style that we place inside the literature. That's why style is very important. Now, let me try to give you a bird's eye view of the world's greatest literatures. Actually, literary experts rank the best literatures in the world. And we as Filipinos, we are very thankful that we have two literatures that landed inside this list. Okay? We have Florante at Laura that landed at number 50 in the universal ranking. And we have also Nole Me Tangere that landed number 99 in the universal ranking. Aside from these two, the other Philippine literatures can be considered classics, but not the world's greatest literatures or classics. Now, number one literature in the universal ranking is still none other than the Bible. This is still considered as the most complete, most explained, most organized literature in the world. Okay? The timeliness. Okay? That is why until now nothing can dislodge this literature from the top spot or the first spot. So, again, in the Philippines, we only have two literatures that landed in the top 100 ranking of the greatest literatures in the world. You have Florante at Laura, again at number 50, and Nole Me Tangere at number 99. Now, let us go to another topic in here. Okay, literatures, one should know that the usage of language is always important, and it actually tells people what kind of person you are. The lowest form of language in the society is always called the vagabond language. Often this is considered as the lowest form of language, and this is the abusive language, the slurred language, the invectives, okay? The bad words, okay, the swearing, that is the vagabond language. Next, you have the common language. Often this is considered as the average form of language wherein plain conversation happens. Okay? So, this is not very courteous, but at least you are communicating. The third language here is the formal language. This time, you are already using language with courtesy, language with respect, language with cordiality, and language wherein you know already how to refer people with the right addresses. That is the third from the lowest. The second, okay? The second from the lowest is technical language. This is the language wherein only people from the same group, from the same profession understand. When doctors talk with doctors, these are the language they use. When lawyers talk with lawyers, these are the language they use, the technical language. Okay, when teachers talk with teachers, these are the language they use. That's why sometimes when the doctor gives an instruction to the nurse, the patient and the family does not understand because you call the technical language. Another term for that is jargon. So another term for technical language is jargon. Believe it or not, dear learners, the highest form of language is literary language, wherein one can use symbolism, one can use syllogisms, one can use representation, one can use, what do you call this? Figurative speeches when they talk. So the highest form of language is still the literary language. Again, let us rank this from top to the bottom. The highest is literary language. Second is technical language. Third is formal language. Fourth is common language. And the most worst and the ugliest of all language, the last is the vagabond language or the abusive and bad language. So to round up our learning, I would like to introduce to you The general classifications of literature. These are the prose and the poetry. The prose is the kind of literature wherein you are just telling something symbolically, but it has no rhymes, it has no meters, it is not very strictly the way it is written. But when you say poetry, it is a literature that uses symbolisms. And then it has strict number of uniform lines, uniform stanzas, okay? It has rhyming and it has rhythm. So this is the difference actually between prose and poetry, but both of them are considered prime literatures because they talk about symbolic as well as figurative languages in literature. So when there is actually tone, there is rhyme, there is rhythm, it's poetry. The absence of that makes it a prose. So in the specific classification of literature, you have many here. You have the narratives, okay? This is just like you narrate. Dramatics, this is what you see on stage, the dramas, the teleseries. Plays, okay? You have this during AYF, okay? When people portray other people, okay? When they portray roles in the stories, melodrama, okay? This is another type of dramatics we're in that they tackle about very soft emotions, melodramas. Then you will have epic, okay? These are literatures of heroic acts. Then you have tragedy. These are literatures that always starts right and end in a very, very sad note. Lyric. These are literatures that results to music. Elegy. These are literatures that focuses on losing someone, on death, on missing something, on the dying. Short story. These are sad to say, but the examples of these are your Valentine pocket romances. In the Bible, the parables are also considered short stories. Okay, novel. These are the things that Stephen King is writing. Who are the other? John Grisham. Okay, so novels are very long literature. Usually it's more than 100 pages and more than 10 chapters. Then you have an ode. This is a literature that pays tribute to a specific someone, a specific thing, a specific event. Okay, that's why one example of an ode is an ode to a nightingale, meaning a dedication, a salute to a nightingale, a kind of bird. That is a kind of poetry. Song, well, these are poetries that has music. Editorial, these are actually literature that deals with the opinion of one person regarding a certain event, a certain political issue, a certain cultural happening. When you say something and it's your opinion over a thing that happened, that is editorial. Then you have letters. Okay, these are the things you write from one person to another person. A very good example of this is love letter. Then you have essays. Okay, you always see this in your test, especially the last part of the test when you have to describe something, when you have to give your analysis, when you have to give your reflection. That is an essay. Then folktale. These are something which may not be true, but you can derive a lesson from, especially if it tells something about culture. Okay? Legends. These are untrue things of the beginning of something. You can have the legend of Maria Makiling. They're trying to say why the mountain is called Maria Makiling because of the stories around it called legend, but that is never the reality. So people try to assume something when they see something they do not know and then make stories out of it, and that becomes a legend. Myths. Actually, myths are stories which are not true, but based on true occurrences, which is also presented to create a point, to drive a point, sometimes to give lesson. So all of these that I mentioned to you are actually the specific classifications of literature and the most common ones. There are many of them. However, in the continuing study of literature, we will meet them one by one. So let us always remember, literature is universal because it travels. Not only travels, it is present all around the world. Okay, literature is also, okay, something that has permanence, because if your literature is good, you will just die, but your literature remains. I hope and pray that our study of introducing literature to you has opened your minds that literature is one field that in the future you can consider being interested with, so that you can travel places without leaving your room. You can learn cultures without leaving your computer table. You can learn about stories and happenings around the world by just sitting in your chair. This is literature per se. Anything written, anything represented by what humans feel. This is literature. So thank you very much for studying literature with us. I hope and I pray that after this video, you will continue reading more things that are written, because the more we are knowledgeable with literature, the more we know things. That's why they say the person with the greatest IQ is always the person that has stored knowledge. Now, where do you get stored knowledge? You get stored knowledge from reading literature. Thank you very much for listening to our discussion in the first module. This is once again Mentor Noy Gonzaga of the Academia Gonzaga Learning System, trying to tell you, be a part of literature, and literature will make you a part of the greatness of life. God bless everyone.